Today I am thinking about a house of cards. Or maybe we might think of it as Jenga. Or maybe a line of dominoes that is creating a beautiful pattern. I am thinking today about the very important substitutes we use to give our life meaning and purpose apart from a relationship with and service to God. Now, some of those substitutes are very important to us. Can we accept that they are but shadowy substitutes that do not actually hold up a life? Let's think about that together today at Calvary. Welcome to At Calvary, and this is the home of Calvary Baptist Church, the podcast home, I am your host, Pastor John. And on the At Calvary podcast, we talk honestly as Christians about Scripture, truth, life questions, and even current events. Sometimes what we talk about is deep, and sometimes is just good fun. Now, we hope to be plain-spoken, fun, and sometimes even thought-provoking, so sit back, put your thinking cap on, and enjoy these thoughts about God, the universe, and everything. And if you can't tell by my opening, we today are going to rejoin King Solomon as he is thinking deeply in the book of Ecclesiastes about life. And he is at the point in his conversation with us where he is really doing step by step analysis of the things people chase in life. I'm going to flip my Bible back open and not read what I'm about to talk about, but rather go back and look at and remind us all what he has already talked about. So if you remember, in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, he has already challenged us with regard to the area of wisdom. And is wisdom, apart from a relationship with and seeking to serve God, is wisdom alone enough? He says, no. And because wisdom brings a type of grief, and we talked about that a few weeks ago. And then in chapter 2, he talks about what about pleasure? If you keep making yourself happy, and what about success? Maybe chasing success. And he says, no, that's not enough to build a life upon. And so then he talks about, becoming wealthy and powerful. And that was not enough. And so now in verse 12 through the end of the chapter, Solomon begins to unpack a few other things that he really wants to ask, is this enough to hold up a life, to make life worth the fact that we end all the same way we die? Are these things that we chase worth leaning on? And so what does he say? He says, beginning in verse 12, he's beginning to think of a legacy. Maybe living for yourself, isn't it? But maybe living for my children or for the legacy that I'm passing on, whether it's my children or the next generation of leaders or people in my field. Is that something that will hold up a life and give it enough meaning to say, okay, this makes the fact that we all die in the end worth it? What does he say? Let's read the text. Beginning in verse 12 of Ecclesiastes chapter 2, he says, "So I turned to consider wisdom, madness, and folly. For what will the man do who will come after the king except what has already been done? And I saw that wisdom excels folly as light excels darkness. And the wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I know that one fate befalls them both. Then I said to myself, as is the fate of the fool, it will also befall me. Why then have I been so extremely wise? So I said to myself, this too is vanity. For there is no lasting remembrance of the wise man as with the fool, inasmuch as in the coming days all will be forgotten, and how the wise man and the fool alike die. So, I hated life, for the work which had been done under the sun, which was grievous to me, because everything is futility and striving after the wind. Thus, I hated all the fruit of my labor, for which I had labored under the sun. For I must leave it to the man who will come after me, and who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool. Yet, he will have control over all the fruit of my labor, for which I have labored by acting wisely under the sun. This too is vanity. Therefore I completely despaired of all the fruit of my labor, for which I had labored under the sun. When there is a man who has labored with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, then he gives his legacy to one who has not labored with them. This too is vanity and a great evil. For what does a man get in all his labor and in his striving with which he labors under the sun? Because all his days his task is painful and grievous. Even at night his mind does not rest. This too is vanity. There is nothing better for a man to eat and drink and tell himself that his labor is good. This also I have seen, that it is from the hand of God. For who can eat and who can have enjoyment without him? For to a person who is good in his sight, he has given wisdom, knowledge, and joy. While to the sinner he has given the task of gathering and collecting, so that he may give to one who is good in God's sight. This too is vanity and striving after the wind. Now, Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 12 has a word. It says, for, right in the middle of the verse. So I turn to consider wisdom, madness, and folly. For, what will the man do who will come after the king except what has already been done? Now the word for, most of the time, is a because statement. Because of something else, what I've just said is true. Now contrast that with the word therefore, which is, as the result of what I've just said, I should do this. So the word for is a causal statement. The word therefore is a response statement. So he is explaining why he is thinking about and considering wisdom, madness, and folly. And it's all about what? It's all about the next generation. And so, for the sake of the next generation, is it better to be a wise man, a madman, or a fool? And he begins to list some benefits. In verse 13, he has benefit number 1. He says, I saw that wisdom excels folly as light excels darkness. So if it is better to have light in your room when you're looking for something that's lost, if it is better, so Solomon says, I look and I see that wisdom is better. It is better to be able to see life correctly than to just stumble through it like an idiot. That's benefit number 1. Benefit number 2 is in verse 14. That when a person is wise, they see. The light is in them. It's not an outside light. It's not someone on the outside telling them what they should or shouldn't do. It becomes a light inside them that they can see. Whereas the fool, he's walking in darkness, and the only way he knows right from wrong, the only way he stops walking like an idiot, is someone tells him. Yet, remember Solomon's question. Does it make dying worth it? And Solomon says, no. No, it doesn't, because it is the same fate that befalls both of them. Both of them die. And so if being wise doesn't stop you from dying, and being foolish doesn't stop you from dying, then they are not significant enough, I should say, significantly, I said it right the first time, significantly enough different for that to be a reason why you're wise. There may be a very good reason why you're wise. I like to see. I like to know right from wrong. I like to make decisions that are trustworthy. Yes, but it doesn't make wisdom strong enough to hold up a life. It merely makes wisdom a useful tool. But then Solomon moves on, because he has just said, I do this for my legacy, because if I have done something well, then my son, my grandson, my great-grandson can follow in my footsteps. That's what he said in the second half of verse 12. For what will the man do who will come after the king except that which was already been done? So if I practice wisdom, I can pass it on to my children and my children's children and my children's children's children. But is legacy a strong enough purpose to hold up a life? The fact that I can pass on wisdom and pass on my belongings and pass on my power and pass on everything that I am. If I pass it all on to the next generation, is that a good enough purpose to make dying worth it? And what does he say in verse 17? He says, so I hated life. Why? Another because statement. For the work which had been done under the sun was grievous to me. Why? Now a very traditional because statement. Because everything is futility and is striving after the wind. And what is this problem? The problem is we still die. And, verse 16, there is no lasting remembrance of the wise man, as also the fool. So even though it is generally true that what you pass down, your children and your children's children and your children's children's children can learn, the reality is that they don't. And the legacy that we think we're passing down, there is no assurance that it will last. And then the second futility is in verse 18, of building our meaning and our purpose on our legacy. And that is this: there is no way to guarantee that the person who follows us will value the legacy we're passing on. Verse 18 says, I must leave, the second of verse 18, I must leave what is that? The fruit of all my labor, to the man who will come after me. And who knows, verse 19, whether he will be a wise man or a fool, yet he will have control over all the fruit of my labor, for which I have labored by acting wisely under the sun. And Solomon underlines, this too is vanity. So if I'm going to build my life on the legacy I'm passing on, and my understanding that, yes, this legacy I'm passing on, it makes my life worth something so valuable that the fact that I'm going to die and not see that legacy play out, that it makes it worth it. Solomon says, no, it doesn't. If a person is honest, legacy alone, wisdom alone, industry alone is not enough. There has to be more. In fact, Solomon points out that questions like these, even if we don't admit it, questions like these are the questions that plague us at night. Verse 23. All his days, Solomon says, the one who's striving and working hard, his task is painful and grievous. Even at night, his mind does not rest. The wondering, will I be successful enough to pass it on to my children? The wondering, will my children take what I pass on to them and use it wisely? And will my children see the same value in passing on the legacy and will pass it on to their children and their children's children? That is a pain because we can't know the answer. And so it plagues us and makes us always wonder, is this really worth it? Now we may try to avoid the question, but Solomon says the reality is that this question plagues us. Now beginning in verse 24, Solomon has just laid a pretty discouraging picture. And so he wants to lighten the picture just a little bit to answer this question. Is it of practical benefit right now to work hard and do your best. So he's going to pause for a second in verses 24 through 26. So he says, beginning in verse 24, "There is nothing better for a man than to eat and drink and tell himself that his labor is good." Now for us, this might seem like it's coming out of left field, but Solomon, remember, is trying to wrestle with a big question without just throwing out with the bathwater the smaller questions. So the big question is, are these things that can hold up the whole life, the meaning and purpose of our life? But the smaller questions are, well, is this still a good thing? And so Solomon is pausing for a second with his big question, and he is saying there is benefit to labor, to working hard. But it's not a benefit that we should overstate. And I'll talk about some application for that in a moment. But he says, no, this is a good thing. It's from the hand of God. He says, because we wouldn't be able to enjoy it. This is verse 25. We wouldn't be able to enjoy our work if God didn't make it a good thing. And so God says, or Solomon says, to a person who is good in his sight, he is given wisdom and knowledge and joy. And that's a good thing. Now, and then Solomon says, and let me talk for a moment about playing, because there will be those who think that playing is better. And he says, no, playing is not better. Because why? Because God is going to give the stuff for the sinner. The stuff that the sinner gathers and collects, he's going to give it to the one who is good in God's sight. And that too is a vanity. It makes a life based upon playing and pleasure and sinfulness, it makes it collapse. And so Solomon says, no, working hard to pass it on to your children and your children's children, whether it be wisdom or power or possessions, no, it is not enough of a reason to build your life on. There is benefit. It is temporary benefit. It's the benefit of enjoying the work of your labor. It's the benefit of being satisfied with your work. But it is not enough to hold up a life. And certainly sinfulness is not enough to hold up a life. Now in a moment, I want to think about what the New Testament says about the vanity of being wise or industrious apart from a relationship with God in Christ and serving Him. And we're going to think about that in a moment, but let's pause now and think about a positive proverb or two from our friend Solomon. And this is from Proverbs chapter 28. Verses 1 and 2. I really like verse 1. Verse 1 is a very useful proverb for understanding what happens with crime, what happens when you confront someone who is obviously doing wrong, what happens with children, even what happens on the sports field when someone commits a foul. And hear this, the wicked flee when no one is pursuing, but the righteous are bold as a lion. Now this proverb is highlighting for us why certain types of fear accompany bad behavior. Why, for example, police can be trained to notice criminals. And it's because unless a criminal is truly a hardened con man, the fact that they've committed crime will show in their posture, in how they respond, even if the policeman isn't even looking at them for the crime yet. The number of times a person is caught for a more serious crime when a police officer pulls them over for a very minor, like traffic infraction, is incredible. And why is that? It's because they run. A policeman will catch someone when they were just pulling them over for speeding 6 miles over the speed limit, or they have a light out and they weren't even going to write them a ticket. But suddenly, the person who is guilty of a much worse crime will run. And so it is clear, it is obvious that this plays out in everyday life, right? People overreact when someone says, "Hey, can I talk to you?" And boom, they explode. What's going on? Well, something in their life is broken. They know it, and they're all worried and tied up inside over it. And it comes out. We see it all the time. And the point is, fear is a common evidence of sin. But slip down a few verses of verse 6. Proverbs 28 verse 6 says, "Better is the poor who walks in his integrity than he who is crooked, though he be rich." Now this proverb actually comes back to something we're talking about with Ecclesiastes, and that is there a benefit to being a good person? And Solomon says yes. There is a benefit to righteousness even though a person is poor. And it has to do with this idea that I'm able to walk in integrity. I'm able to look at myself in the mirror, and the person people see is the person that I am. And that is a benefit, a good thing. Because it is righteousness, not money or power, that secures the life of a person or of a people. And that is something significant for us. That there is a benefit to living the way God has designed us to live, even if there isn't a material benefit. There is a true life benefit. And we're going to think about why that is over the course of time as we continue to study the book of Ecclesiastes. But I want to jump into how the New Testament wrestles with this idea of the benefits or lack benefits of chasing some of these things that Solomon has been talking about, and why it doesn't make our life better and it doesn't hold up a life. And the first is the idea of the significance of a legacy, but only if that legacy includes a relationship with and a service to God. Jesus tells a parable in response to a question. So I'm going to start with the question. Someone in the crowd, this is Luke chapter 12, someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." But Jesus said to him, "Man, who appointed me a judge or arbitrator over you?" Then he said to them, "Beware and be on your guard against every form of greed. For not even when one has an abundance does his life consist of his possessions." And then he told them this parable, saying, "The land of a rich man was very productive. And he began reasoning to himself, 'What shall I do since I have no place to store my crops?' Then he said, 'This is what I will do. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store up for myself my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have many goods laid up for many years to come. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your soul is required of you, and now who will own what you have prepared? So is the man who stores up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God.'" So Jesus challenges us with this idea that if chasing possessions, and he doesn't just say be aware of greed, he says be aware of every form of greed. Not just the greed that everyone would say, "Oh, that's awful. You want to steal and kill so that you can have lots of money." Yeah, everybody would be against that. At least we hope so. But he also says be aware of every form of greed, for there are types of greed that look like godly living. And by the way, I will tell you, I've seen them. They're the Facebook ads about how I've got this system and Christians can get $100K a month by following my system. Did you catch that? And it's always couched in some sort of, you can give more to your favorite charity, but you can also be super comfortable. I mean, it's always couched in that so that we can baptize our greed and turn it into something supposedly commendable or laudable. And of course it's not. Because Jesus said, if you store up treasure for yourself and not rich toward God, this is the bankruptcy of living a life built upon anything except a relationship with and service to God. And what's interesting is most of us miss that it is in this context that Jesus begins to teach his disciples about worry in the Gospel of Luke. He says, do not, right after verse 22, he says, for this reason, because there is a great bankruptcy to being rich toward yourself and not rich toward God, because there's a great bankruptcy in that, do not worry about your life as to what you will eat, nor for your body as to what you will put on. For life is more than both. And he talks about the ravens. He talks about how if you worry, can you add even a moment to your life? He talks about the lilies of the field. And so he says, do not seek what you will eat and what you will drink, and do not keep worrying, for all these things the nations, and again he's talking about the lost, eagerly seek. But your Father knows you need these things, but instead seek his kingdom, and these things will be added to you. And do not be afraid, little flock. And this is so interesting. He doesn't say, do not be afraid, little flock, for the Father will give you food and clothing and riches. He doesn't say that. He says, for the Father has chosen gladly to give you the kingdom. Because the important thing is the kingdom. The important thing is a relationship with God. The important thing, the truly significant thing that can hold up a life is knowing God and serving him. Now, the Apostle Paul echoes this. And he does it in direct connection with being, and I'm going to use the hyperbole of our day, the best Jew ever. He says in Philippians chapter 3, he says, if anyone else has a mind to put confidence in the flesh, I have far more. I was circumcised on the 8th day. I'm of the nation of Israel. I'm of the tribe of Benjamin. I'm a Hebrew of Hebrews. As to the law, I am a Pharisee. As to zeal, I persecuted the church. As to righteousness, which is found in the law, I was found blameless. So, again, our hyperbole today, I am the best Jew ever. But then he says, verse 7, whatever things were gained to me, those things I have counted as loss for the sake of Christ. More than that, I count all things to be loss in view of the surpassing value of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord, from whom I have suffered the loss of all things, and count them but rubbish, so that I may gain Christ, and may be found in him, not having a righteousness of my own that comes from the law, but that which is through faith in Christ, the righteousness which comes from God on the basis of faith. And I do this, why? So that I may know him, and the power of his resurrection, and the fellowship of his sufferings, being conformed to his death, in order that I may attain to the resurrection from the dead. So Paul says all these things that he could count as gain, again, best Jew ever, he says, no, I throw them away to know Jesus. I throw them away so that I can know him, live for him, follow him, and in doing so, I embrace whatever suffering he calls me to, because as I serve him and suffer because I'm serving him, I can identify with, in other words, I'm showing that I have accepted that the cross is what is necessary, not my good works, but the cross is what is necessary. And when I do that, I know that the way God resurrected Jesus is the way He's going to resurrect me. And that's what held Paul's life up. That is what gave it meaning. So when he passes on his faith, he is passing on something that is precious. And it's not the legacy that makes it worthwhile. Although Paul had no doubt many individuals who were his legacy, but it isn't the legacy that was holding his life up. It was knowing Christ that held his life up. And because of that, he had a legacy. Not that the legacy was holding him up, but that Christ was holding him up. And then comes the legacy. And that is the key. If you've ever heard me use this expression, and it's an old one, often we put the cart before the horse. And our understanding of what God has said and what God has done, we go to the benefits of following God, and we act like that is the point. The benefits of following God are not the point. The benefits of following God are the benefits, the consequences of following God. Following God is the point. That is the thing that gives our life meaning. That is the thing that makes it worthwhile. And if it doesn't, then I would submit to you, we have put the cart first. And it explains so often why we are so disappointed in God. You say, what do you mean disappointed in God? When God does not give us what we think the benefit is supposed to be in following Him. And James Dobson calls it the betrayal barrier. When we hit the betrayal barrier with God, where we thought, God, you're supposed to give me these certain things because I'm following you. You're supposed to protect me from harm. You're supposed to bless me with material wealth. And not, I don't need to be as wealthy as Bill Gates, but you should be blessing me. When we think those thoughts, we betray the fact that we put the cart first. And we made it about the things and not about the one who saves us. And that's what Solomon is wrestling with. And that's what the New Testament urges us to push past. To push past the substitutes that cannot actually hold up a life. Because life isn't all roses without thorns. No, there's thorns. Jesus told us there would be. And so the question comes to us, what will we do? Now it's almost time for Ask Pastor John. But before we get there, let's pause and let's laugh a little together. This has been a serious episode. So let me share a few Christian jokes. Now, these might be groaners, but remember, I am a dad, so just bear with me. Number one. What do you call a Bible character who just pulled in to church? Well, of course, he's a parking lot. Have you heard this one? What did God's people say when food fell from heaven? Oh, manna! Yeah, that one makes me groan. Just saying, when I read that one online, I was like, wow. But maybe it gave you a chuckle. I may have already shared this one, but it's just awesome. I have a friend who does puppets, and she has a pirate song for her puppets. In fact, a couple pirate songs. And so what did pirates call Noah's boat? Can you hear it? The Ark. Aye. Yeah, that one doesn't make me groan. That one makes me smile. Now, this is kind of an up-to-date joke. Which minor prophet is well known thanks to cookies? Cookies, you know, those yummy things you eat? Well, of course, it's famous Amos cookies. Yes. And so we know all about Amos. And by the way, the double reason that joke is funny to me is that Amos isn't about cookies at all, but he does do some things with plumb lines and wine and grape. He gathered grapes and figs. That was his job. He was a vine dresser and a harvester of figs. And so maybe he put figs in cookies. No, probably not. I don't think they did that back then. So that just makes me smile too. Now, when someone needed a boat made, what did the people in town say? Can you think of this? This is another name joke. Well, they said, "We know a guy." Yeah, we know a guy. Can't you hear it? All right. Those are the jokes, folks. But here's our Bible trivia question of the day. Perhaps you know it. We'll see. So, what person returned to Israel to build up the walls of Jerusalem after the exile? Our answer will come after the third half of today's podcast. It's our off-the-cuff Q&A to end our time together. So let's do and ask Pastor John. This week's question: Dear Pastor John, what should we do about boredom? I often find myself wondering, what is boredom? And why did God create a world with boredom as a main feature of daily life? I mean, at least in this age. And I'm not talking about depression. I'm just talking about boredom. Now, this is a very good question. And I think, first of all, I'd like to separate boredom of a child from the boredom of an adult. And I'd like to separate it because I think they're caused by different things. There's going to be a little overlap, especially as the child moves into adolescence. But I think that boredom in children has a kind of two underlying causes that have to do with their age, whereas boredom in adults has more to do with certain habits caused by repetition. Let me explain what I mean. Boredom in children is caused first and foremost by the fact that their experience of life is very, very limited. They have not experienced enough life yet to capture their imagination. And the answer for that, you could probably already hear it, the answer for that is going to be to expose them to types of play and types of activity that increases their experience without making them, join the Foreign Legion and, fly to the moon and, all things that they cannot possibly do, except where? In books. They can explore in books places that they have never been. And I'm going to say in books rather than in videos, because in videos, everything is played out for them. Everything. So the inflection of people's voices is played out for them. What the scene looks like is played out for them. And what happens, what each character looks like and how each character, all the things about the characters, all of them are pre-written for them. So a child's imagination is, or very, very much can be, left in autopilot. Now, there is a way to use the visual medium of TV and movies to stimulate a child's imagination. But it's going to require a parent's involvement by asking questions. Asking the why question. asking the how question, asking the what do you think they should have done differently question. And I'm not talking, some parents use that as opportunities to turn television and movies into parables. You can do that. There's nothing wrong with that. But I am talking about just using those things to capture the imagination of a child. And by asking the question to push them past what has been, delivered to them as a whole world, and this is the way the world is, but to ask, okay, could they have made different choices? And what would have happened if they did? And can you play act that or think that out or tell me a story where they made different, what do you think would have happened? Because that is the thing that books do. See, books don't tell you the tone of voice that someone used. And so you can imagine it sarcastic. You can imagine it kind. You can imagine it. And then you discover, as the book unfolds, you get to discover if you were right or wrong. Because the actions of the characters will teach you what the heart of the character is, especially if it's a well-written book. And so those kind of things capture the imagination of a child. And then the other thing that comes alongside that is many times children aren't forced to use that imagination and entertain themselves. And I don't mean forced as in some sort of wicked way, but I mean forced in the sense of they're required to do it themselves. When I was a kid, the reality that my mom would send my brother and I outside with a bat, a ball, a kickball, and our wagon, and said, "Go play." And it was up to us what we did with those materials. We didn't have to play ball, and many times we didn't. We didn't have to pull the toys in the wagon. Many times we didn't. But it was a subtle and gentle requirement that we were supposed to go outside and play and entertain ourselves with our imaginations. And so those two things, the exposing a child to life experiences that they can't expose themselves to because they can't live other lives through books, through reading, through conversation with their parents that involve the use of imagination. And then the requirement that is what you use is a great thing. And this is where the life of a child and the life of a grown-up overlap. And that is that sometimes as we move into adolescence and then move into adulthood, that part of our experience we stop using. Maybe because we're slapped down as adolescents. Oh, you shouldn't be imagining so much. You shouldn't be thinking so much. You need to learn this stuff in math class. You need to learn this stuff in history class. Stop asking the what-if questions because that's not what happens. So learn this biology. And so we stop doing it, or we think it's just for kids. But the reality is, we teach ourselves as we enter adulthood to stop using the tool that deepens our life so that boredom is difficult. So that boredom is something that we don't experience. And so we get bored by habit. And of course, our devices today help us. Because our devices, spoon feed us imagination, but it's not helpful imagination. There's no challenge to the imagination. It's just repetitive pablum. It's like eating baby food all the time for the brain. And you may say, well, Pastor John, where are you getting this other than just kind of conjecture and just kind of whatever? Well, it's this. Over and over in the Bible, God's people, now we accept it as Scripture, but when God's people wrote the Scripture, God inspired them And not just inspired them the way we think of prophets, as in God spoke and the prophet wrote it down, like Moses with the Ten Commandments. But also we have God's people inspired by God to ask big questions. Like King David in the Psalms. When I consider the heavens and the work of your hands. What did David say? He asked this question, what is man that you are mindful of him? Or the Son of Man that you consider him? You have made him a little lower than, the New Testament quotes it as, you have made him a little lower than the angels and crowned him with glory and strength. Where did the Psalms come? Some of the Psalms, yes, came from points of great pain. But they were used to what? They were used to thinking deep thoughts. They were used to using their imagination to contemplate the deeper things of God. And quite frankly, do we still have that ability? Do we still have that ability when we're doing the thing that requires very little thought? And we could say, I'm bored. Do we use that time to think deeper and deeper and deeper thoughts about God, the universe, and everything? Because that's what we did before we claimed to be bored all the time. The little moments that didn't have eternal significance, we turn them into opportunities to contemplate the things that did have eternal significance. Now, is that what we're going to do? Are we going to do that? And by the way, it is a skill we're going to have to relearn. We are. Because at first it's going to be hard. But it is a skill of great significance. And I would urge you to learn it. Now, a moment ago, I asked this Bible trivia question. Who returned to Israel to build up the walls of Jerusalem after the exile? And the answer, you might have said Ezra. Ezra built the temple, but the one who was in charge of building the walls is, of course, Nehemiah. Yes. Now, maybe you'd like to continue this conversation about Ecclesiastes or about boredom. Well, you can connect with us at any of our social media portals. On Facebook, you can find us at calvarybaptist.indianola. On X, you can find us at Calvary for Jesus. And on the web, you can find us at calvaryindianolablog.com. And next time, we're going to jump into Galatians chapter 3, verses 1 through 14, which begins my favorite sarcastic Bible verse. Now, it is our hope that during this podcast you've been given something to think about, something to stretch you, and certainly a greater freedom to think deeply about this life God has given us. May you know the grace of God found in Jesus, and may His love richly bless your life. Take care now, and God bless.